Judge, I'm going to bring the council to order. We'll do the pledge first, and then we're going to do your swearing in, and then we'll just go to the rest of our agenda.
My wife would drive it and give her half a chance, but
Yeah, it's not that long to drive.
13 minutes. That's
not bad.
No, thank you. That's what the good Lord made plans for.
Yeah.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and call this town council meeting to order. If everyone would join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Good afternoon, everybody. Before we get into the agenda, we do have a swearing in that we would like to do today with our Judge Strauss. And I have to admit, for this whole meeting, I am dealing with a terribly, terribly uncontrollable cold and cough. So
It's good there.
yeah, so at any time during this meeting, if you see me all of a sudden point towards the Mayor Pro Tem, he's going to seamlessly jump up and do whatever needs to be done.
That's how we often describe my participation.
But we would like to do our swearing in. And Judge, I have to remember when you swore me in,
Yes.
you went really fast, lots and lots of
I had more people to swear in.
I had to remember that, so I'm gonna go like a whole 10 sentences at one time.
Okay.
Yeah, so, all right. So if you'll repeat after me, I,
I,
your name,
John Stroud,
do solemnly swear
do solemnly swear
that I am duly qualified according to the Constitution of this state
that I am duly qualified according to the Constitution of this state
to exercise the duties of the office to which I have been appointed,
to exercise the duties of the office to which I have been appointed,
and that I will, to the best of my ability,
and that I will, to the best of my ability,
discharge the duties thereof,
discharge the duties thereof,
and preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of this state
and preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of this state
and of the United States, so help me
and
God.
of the United States, so help me God. Okay.
We really thank you for your continued service. We can't say how much we appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Judge.
Way to go, John.
10 more years.
He's just walking out. He's not gonna come in.
You say I didn't get the no time memo.
Kim, thank you very much. Excuse me. So with that, I'll move to the approval of the minutes. First, we have the approval of the minutes of the Town Council meeting of April 2nd, 2019. Do I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Any, excuse me, any comments, changes?
None.
No.
None? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, the minutes of the special town council meeting of April 11th, 2019. Do I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Lots of seconds. Any changes, comments?
No.
None? All in favor of approving those minutes?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye, okay. So the minutes are approved. Let me just, excuse me.
Is this where I jump in?
Mm-mm.
Oh.
No, not so fast. You seem very eager to do that. No, in all seriousness, for mayor's comments, I do have just one one comment that I would like to make, and this one is a serious one. I think probably everybody in this room knows that our former mayor, Bill Wirt, passed away last Monday, April 29th. I don't know if everybody on the council had the opportunity to know Bill or work with him. I know a number of people, certainly Charlie and a number of people in the audience did. If you don't know Bill, he was a former GE executive. After he and his wife Pat moved here, I think around 1990, 2000, Bill was very involved in the community. He was a KICA board member, I think at least for one term. He was also, I think, probably our longest term mayor. He was mayor for 4 terms from 2002 to 2010. Bill certainly had a significant impact on this community, not only in terms of how long that he was mayor, but the number of accomplishments and the number of things that Bill was involved in. There will be a remembrance, a celebration of Bill's life this Friday, I'm told, at 4 o'clock at Briars Creek. And again, just on behalf of the town and the town council, our thoughts and condolences are certainly to his family and to his wife Pat, who I certainly do know. And again, Bill, he made a significant contribution to the town, and so we have all of our thoughts to his family. So for my mayor's comments, that is the only thing I wanted to comment on. So with that, we'll turn to citizens' comments. If anybody has a comment on something that is on today's agenda, if you would head on up to the podium, tell us who you are. Might want to stand in line. Yes.
Good afternoon. Kelly Thorvalson, South Carolina Aquarium. I would like to just say thank you to the Plastic Initiative Committee of Kiowa for all the hard work that you've done over the last year in regards to plastic pollution on Kiowa Island, and to council for considering this ordinance today. I have worked with the Sea Turtle Rescue Program for about 15 years at the aquarium, and we've seen a dramatic increase of turtles coming in with plastics, and you heard this in the workshop. But even since that workshop took place, we have admitted yet another turtle with plastics, and so that is of 4 sea turtles admitted in 2019, 3 of those have plastics, and that's just an overwhelming majority. It's really not sustainable for sea turtles. The most recent data on hatchlings with plastics, we don't get hatchlings here that die because our hatchlings move too far offshore. But Florida's hatchlings do wash up when they pass away, and 100% of the hatchlings, the deceased hatchlings that are necropsied in Florida, have plastics in their GI tract, and it's known that hatchlings are much less discriminatory in terms of food, and that is across the board. That's across the globe, that younger animals are less discriminatory in what they eat than the older turtles. And I know, Kiowa has such an incredible effort here to preserve these these threatened and endangered species, these turtles, one of the densest nesting areas in all of South Carolina. So you all are so important. And so in the name of sea turtles, but certainly in the name of this community and our own health, I think it's so important that this is seriously considered today. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kelly.
Any other citizens' comments? All right. With that, we'll turn to old business. And we have an agenda item to consider approval of the Municipal Center Native Plant Demonstration Area Project. If you recall, at our last meeting, Jim Jordan gave a overview and presentation on that project, and I think in between had sought comments from any council members. So what I would ask, actually what I would, to get the conversation going, what I would do is make a motion to approve an initial expenditure of $6,000 for phase 1 of the proposed native plant demonstration project. And if I have a second for that, then we
Second
can open
that.
it up for discussion. Can I have a second? All right, with that, I would like to open it up to any conversation, discussion.
I-
Well, I'll go first, because my guess is I'm the only one speaking on my side of the aisle. I applaud the effort. I have no issues with the desire or the goal. But I think with almost every issue associated with real estate, location is important. And I think the location of putting this trail at Town Hall, which is going to be very lightly trafficked, will minimize its value to the community. I would have preferred for it to have been on a different location, perhaps in conjunction with the Conservancy, but I struggle to support it based on its location, and that's really the only reason I struggle to support it.
I'll make a comment. I think because we purchased several years ago this very valuable, in my opinion, piece of land, I think finding good uses, and this is a good use, I think, for the land we do own and can control. I think you're right. There is some concern about will we get people to come here. But I think the more the town matures, the more we publicize this, I would like to see more people come to Town Hall. So I think it's a good use of land that we own, and I hope we get a lot of visitors.
I also feel it's a good use of the property that we own, and I think having the native plants exhibited there is very, very important, especially since, from what I understand, this is going to be a requirement for replacement of plants on Kiowa, and I think it's a way for that in itself could attract people to come over and look at it and see what kind of plants we're talking about. I have gotten a few comments from residents that they're very encouraged by the fact that we're looking at native plants. So I support this effort.
I do too. I guess I also thought, I don't know whether that was in the original plan or not, but this could also, you know, we could hopefully one day have a school bus or two here from Angel Oak or from the middle school or something, and kids going through with a biology teacher or whatever it is. And that's actually probably easier to bring them here than to bring them somewhere on the island. So I think for very limited expense, I think this is a good use of our land.
The only thing I guess I would add, and while I'm going to support this, I share Chris's concern about the location. Jim and I have had that conversation a number of times, that clearly, you know, I want to support, and I think the town wants to support the concept of moving towards native plants. My biggest concern is simply our residents, if we build this, going to come here to use it. And so all I would ask is that if we are going to make this expenditure, and when I made the motion, you may notice I made it, this was originally designed as a two-phase project, and the motion I made was at this point only with phase one, on the idea that this would come back to the council after phase one before we move to the next one. That we are gonna need to work really hard to make sure we sell this and market it in the community, because I do have reservations that if we just simply do it and put out a couple of communications, people are not gonna find their way here. But I think the intention is correct, so I'm willing to support it at this point.
Mayor, may I add something?
Mm-hmm.
I look at it as a place that residents certainly can come to, but I also see visitors coming to the visitor center and having the opportunity to see a wildlife native plant demonstration in the area could probably be encouraged also. And I think last year we had over 1,000 people come to the visitor center in this building.
Okay, any other, all right, with that, we've got a motion and a second, all in favor?
Aye.
Any against?
No.
Okay, all right, the proposal passes. Consent agenda, we have one item on the consent agenda to consider approval of the proposal from the Greenery for Landscape Services for town-owned properties. And because it's a consent agenda, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay, that passes. Move to new business.
Mhm.
The first item we have is to consider approval of the state ATAX funding amounts, and you have in your package excuse me, the recommendations that were made by the State Accommodations Tax Committee, they were reviewed and recommended for approval without change by Ways and Means. Do I have a motion to approve?
It's moved.
Do I have a
Second? Second.
Any comments? Yes, sir.
Mayor, I'd just like to comment that we did have a request from Freshfields to consider the addition of the $2,000 that was cut from their original request. And I did a little research on Freshfields, and I asked about the Easter activities they had, where if anyone was over there, the green was just filled with people, and evidently there were between 3,000 and 3,500 people attending. Granted, they're not all new visitors, but there were a lot of visitors, and there were a lot of families that took their children there. Plus, knowing the other activities that we have access to on Freshfields all year round, I really think it's important that we support them, and I think that it would be helpful to them to apply another $2,000 to their request. And I had talked to Dorota about this, and if we were able to do this, if the council would concur, we could take the money from the county, county tax and use it for that reason.
If we're going to do that, then what we would need to do, and we can raise this in
Okay.
about 7.5 minutes, but we would need to then, when we get to the budget item, because that would be an amendment to the budget.
Okay,
So let's then, what I ask is, why don't you defer that suggestion until we get to the budget, and then we can entertain it there, because that's where it would come out of.
okay,
This is solely for the state accommodations tax.
okay.
Okay?
I'd like to defer to the further discussion later.
Okay. All right. Do I have any other comments? All right. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay. Next item is to consider approval of the proposal from McCormick Taylor for the Kiowa Island Parkway engineering services. This recommendation was also discussed and recommended for approval in the Ways and Means Committee. I do want to add a couple comments. There was some conversation of Ways and Means, and we've had some conversations with McCormick Taylor since then about the project. This recommendation is, as you know, is for the construction engineering, construction administration for what is intended to be the eventual repaving of the parkway. As part of that project, we have 3 or 4 sort of potential additional issues that we went back out to as part of our bids to incorporate as part of the project. One of those was to figure out what we might want to do with raising the road in certain areas. One was to look at the whole issue of paving the shoulders to the road, curbing, or some other avenue to deal with all the cars and trucks that prefer to drive on the grass rather than the road. Some additional bridge repairs, dealing with the ingress and egress by the Freshfields property and so on. And those were all potential additions to this project. What I would like to do is to make the motion to approve the recommendation of Ways and Means to engage McCormick Taylor for the design, engineering, construction, and administration for the parkway for an amount not to exceed $277,566, which is the amount on the bid. And the reason for it to be not to exceed is that I think we are still going to have discussions with McCormick Taylor about which of these additional items are not going to be in the project. The major change probably from what we've discussed is in our initial discussions with McCormick, it is unlikely that if we want to raise the road in any places along the parkway, it's unlikely that we could do that and still have the road repaved before the PGA. And the major problem would be permitting. So what I think what we're probably going to do, if the council approves the recommendations, we'll go ahead and sit down with McCormick. We will probably want to ask them to actually go forward with the Mingo design, so that we end up with an actual design, construction design, pricing and so on for raising the road. But on the idea that that would be separate from the repaving project, we could, if there was time, choose to do it as part of the repaving, or it essentially is there now for a future town council to do at a later date. So the major thing I want to make clear is that we aren't necessarily going to go forward and raise the road as part of this project, because it's not likely that we can do it. You know, does that all make sense?
May I ask a question?
Yeah.
I thought there was, in addition to the Mingo Point curve, flooding by or commonly flooding by the real estate office or further in.
Yeah.
Is that gonna be looked at the same time?
Exactly, and actually that's what makes it more complicated, because most likely, if we're going to raise the road, the way it needs to be done is probably by building some sort of a Gambian wall that goes from Mingo towards the first gate to deal with whatever length needs to be raised. So to do that, you're gonna have to have all the permitting of the wall with DHEC, which is gonna take a long time. And all of that area needs to be evaluated in elevation. The presumption, I think, from the data that we have from the project that you're doing with Kika, is that the road probably has to be raised from Mingo all the way to in front of the real estate center. And that's the problem. I mean, we probably need a couple months of, evaluation before we would even get to that point. So I think that it would probably go that way.
Okay.
Yeah. And, the same thing, we have an issue with the paved shoulders, what makes that messy, and I know former mayor sitting there probably knows this better than I do, but the catch-22 we get into there is the easiest design is to just extend the pavement a couple feet and put in sort of the corrugated, the rumble strip. But the problem we have is the pedestrian path is so close to the road in some cases, there's not a lot of room for the additional pavement. The better way is to put rolled curbs, but the minute you do that, you're causing yourself significant drainage problems and expense, and because the curbs hold the water. So the point is, we want to go ahead and issue the potentially get approval for the entire contract with McCormick, but the way we do this may be to actually extend out the Mingo Point piece to a future date. So with that, the motion again would be to approve the recommendation Ways and Means to engage McCormick Taylor for design, engineering, construction administration for the Parkway for an amount not to exceed $277,566. If I have a second.
Second.
Any additional discussion, conversation?
No.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right. Item C, Bruce, are you handling this? Excuse me. This is to consider approval of resolution 2019-1 to adopt the revised Charleston Regional Hazard Mitigation Plan.
Good afternoon. The Regional Hazard Mitigation Plan is basically re-adopted on a 5-year cycle. It is updated. Currently, all jurisdictions in the state are going through, well, most of us on the coastal area anyway, haven't gone inland yet, are going currently through our CRS audits. This is part of the county's audit. This is also a requirement that authorizes the town to seek assistance during, should there be an event on the island that we need to seek assistance through Charleston County and others. The adoption, we have adopted this since 1999 on a 5-year cycle. It's up for adoption again. Usually it's adopted at the beginning of the year. This year, when the submittal went forward to Homeland Security, it was rejected. Homeland Security had requested additional information that historically had never been requested in the past. There was some back and forth with the state FEMA office and the federal FEMA office. Finally, they agreed, and all the jurisdictions had to resubmit some additional information that FEMA was requesting from us. That being said, that was all submitted by all jurisdictions, and here we are ready for adoption at this point in time. That's pretty much all there is to it, if there are any questions.
Anybody have any
No.
questions?
Okay.
All right, do I have a motion to adopt?
So moved.
Second.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
I apologize for the coughing. All right. The next item D, is to consider approval of ordinance 2019-2, which is an ordinance to adopt the fiscal year 2019-20 budget for the town of Kiowa Island. And as I believe you all know, the budget ordinance requires 2 readings, so this is the first reading. And the budget has been actually discussed in Ways and Means. Now on 3 occasions, we had a meeting where we discussed the revenue elements of the budget, a second meeting where the focus was on the spending expenditures, and then just prior to this meeting, the Ways and Means Committee considered and recommended the budget for approval. I just have, I know that the town council members have all now been through this in some detail, but for the public, it is a voluminous document, and it's easy to get lost in it. So I just want to highlight, I think, just a couple of the key takeaways from the budget this year that is being recommended. First, and I think most important, the budget that we are preparing to approve has in it a surplus of about, and these are all approximate numbers, but about $2.46 million. So, the towns are required to operate on a balanced budget, and we again are operating with surplus. The level of spending in this budget is approximately 75% of our total projected revenues. In the budget, on the revenue side, we are essentially projecting overall relatively flat revenue for this year versus last year's budget. And if you look in the detail, what you'll see is that our individual revenue sources, those things like business licenses, business permits, all of our various accommodations, tax items, all of those, we have projections of moderate 2 to 3% increases. But the town has benefited the last couple of years by some significant one-time increases in building permit revenue as a result. Thank you very much, Liz, to the resort for their building projects. And as we've always known, that one-time revenue was going to drop off as those projects neared completion. So what you're seeing in the budget this year is moderate increases in our revenue, but we're also experiencing the drop-off in all of that one-time building permit revenue. So overall revenue is relatively flat. Spending, we're up just moderately, about 2%. After you adjust out of this our capital spending, which just does vary from year to year. I would point out that 2% is less than inflation, so essentially we're holding our spending to inflation or below. If you look into the details of the budget, you will see that we, like every other entity in the Charleston area, and certainly out on Kiowa, whether it's the resort or Kika or the partners, are being impacted by higher employment costs. And so, we do have in the budget, if you look at both salaries, but particularly such things as medical costs and so on, probably higher than inflation increases. But those have been offset by holding spending or spending reductions elsewhere. So our overall spending is up at about 2%. I would also point out that the budget holds what we've termed in the past some of our discretionary spending. And those are items like our support for the Arts Council, the support for our charitable funding each year, a lot of our environmental programs, wildlife research, and so on, that we've been able to, in this budget, hold those programs and spending essentially at the same level that we have in past years. Staffing, there is no increase in headcount incorporated as part of this budget. And when I say that, I'm talking about the 18 full-time employees. We, on our deputy side, I'm not including any of those numbers. Cash reserves, we will end the year with about projected with about $24 million combined between restricted and unrestricted funds. And we are continuing or even accelerating our practice of beginning to contribute some of our surplus each year to our capital and emergency funds. So, you know, I think, again, as anybody tries to look through the many pages of this budget, it can be hard to pick out some of the key elements of it. So I think we've tried to summarize that. The one thing I will point out, as I have every year, is anybody who looks at the $24 million year-end cash reserve, it's very easy to jump to the conclusion that the town is cash rich, has lots of cash, and to think of all of the ways that we might be able to spend it. The one thing I always want to point out is that the town does not have a property tax. We assess no property tax. To the largest extent, almost all of our sources of revenue are economy related. They are driven by the business cycle. They are either driven by building activity on the island, building permits, business activity through business licenses, or by the health of our tourism business and the accommodations taxes that we get as a result of our tourism business on the island. So all of those sources of revenue are highly tied to the economy, and we are and have been riding on the wave of a very good economy over the last few years, but we all know that can change overnight. So the town has always tried to be conservative and make sure that we do not spend all of the money when the economy is doing really well, because again, it only takes a change and all of that revenue disappears. And the other thing to remember is that in an island this size on the coast, subject to hurricanes and other events, that we've done estimates before on what a Cat 5 hurricane would do to this community in terms of recovery cost, and those estimates are sometimes equal to 1 or 2 years worth of our total revenue. So yes, the $24 million a year in cash reserves is impressive, and I think it's a sign, I think, of good, thoughtful budgeting by a lot of town councils over a good number of years. But we also have to remember that it would not take much to put a real demand on those resources. So just want to give a few highlights on what is in this budget. So with that, I would ask, first of all, open it up, I would ask for a motion to approve.
So moved.
Do I have a second? Do I have any, again, there's 2 readings, so we have the ability to make any changes or adjustments between now and the second reading. Are there any questions, comments, I'm looking down here because I'm
Okay.
expecting one.
I apologize for not bringing this up at Ways and Means, but it occurred to me that we did have a request from Freshfields to revisit, take, the $2,000 that was reduced from their allocation. And when I was looking at the state taxes, county tax and the local and whatever, I understand that the county tax has to be spent within the year on visitor activities. And as I said, I did look into Freshfields, and I found that I was over there for the Easter presentation, and it was packed. And evidently, this has been a record attendance, 3,000 to 3,500. Also, all the other activities that are constantly going out at Freshfields all year round are attractive to our visitors and to our residents and families. So I'd just like to ask the council to reconsider the request for the additional $2,000.
Okay. We can handle this in two ways. We can either have some discussion about it, or what I can ask is to ask you to turn that into a form of a motion, and I think that's probably the most appropriate, is turn it into a form of a motion.
Okay?
And we'll see if we have a second, and then if we do, we can open it up for discussion and go from there.
Okay, I would move that we reconsider the allocation of funds to Freshfields to include the $2,000 that was reduced.
And this would come as part of the motion from what,
It
from
would, it is
county-
possible to get it from
county accommodation
county
tax?
accommodations tax.
Yeah, to be clear, we're not reallocating state tax money, we're simply
Right.
asking for an extra 2,000 out of county A tax.
Yes.
All right, so we have a motion. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Second, okay. So with that, I'll open it up to discussion. So we have
My comment would be that we want to be careful on these types of issues because peeling state tax, which is in essence what we're doing, is a difficult situation. The entity that took one of the biggest hits this year was the town. Now, if you take a look at the dollar figures, we took a small decrease, I think $3,000. But we actually took a rather significant hit because as a percentage of what we typically spend for law enforcement, this will be one of the lowest percentage years that we got reimbursed. And the town took that position in large part because there is such high demand for state tax dollars. And especially with the PGA and the importance of the tourism generated by the resort, we felt those were important entities to support. So I have no issues with the motion, I'll vote for it, but I just want to caution the other members of town council that this is somewhat slippery slope to be treading on in the long run.
And again, I mean, it's $2,000, so I'm not gonna object, but I think for the record too, I kind of want to raise a concern because I don't want to get on a slippery slope here. We have had situations in the past, and an example has been the motoring retreat where the state accommodations tax did not approve the full recommendation, and for good reason, the town council then turned around and decided it would make up some of the difference or additionally supplement. What I would be concerned about though is just generally opening up a sense in the community that you go to the state accommodations tax first, and then whatever you don't get there, you can just, then let's go to the town council and get those funds out of other tax funds. Just because I mean, I get concerned that it starts off as a couple $1,000s and,
Right.
and then it becomes a regular sort of thing. So I would really want to be careful. Again, this is only a couple thousand, so I'm not going to lose a lot of sleep about it, but the practice could be problematic
I
over
understand.
time. And I think Chris is right that the town did take a big hit on this. So, any other? All right, we have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any against? Okay, so we can make that adjustment. With that, then, Stephanie, do we need to amend the motion to approve the budget to be,
To incorporate
To
the
incorporate
$2,000
the
that
$2,000.
be, come from the county A tax.
all right, let's just assume it's been amended as such. So as amended, all in favor?
As amended.
Aye.
Yes. Aye,
Okay. All right.
thank you.
Okay. So now we will move to item F, which is to consider approval of ordinance 2019-03, an ordinance to prohibit the distribution and use of certain single-use plastics. And I do think it's important, excuse me, that we have some discussion on this. So let me first go ahead and make a motion to get this on the table. I'll make a motion to adopt on first reading, and again, this requires 2 readings. On first reading, an ordinance to prohibit the distribution and use of certain single-use plastics. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second.
All right, with that, I'll also open this up for discussion, and I will point out that the town council has, in addition to discussing this in town council, we had a workshop a couple weeks ago with Jim Jordan and some members of the task force that worked on this proposal, so there has been some discussion, but I'd like to go ahead and open it up for conversation.
I seem to be leadoff hitter today, so I'll do it again. Jim, can you come up? You and I have actually spoke privately, so there's no sandbagging here going on. As I read the text of the ordinance, I have a couple of questions that have been brought to me and that I can't answer with the text. And that is that plastic knives and forks, other than within town hall or at town events, are not banned. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Can I ask that we change the text or add text to the wording of the document that indicates that that is an exception?
Yeah, I think we can certainly clarify that.
Is the
Probably a
same,
good
is
idea.
the same true of the red Solo type cups or the plastic cups that somebody would take on the beach?
That's right. Those would not be regulated either. Neither would, plastic water bottles, plastic cups, plastic plates. None of that would be.
Okay,
Would
and
be
again, I
regulated.
would ask if staff can work on putting some language
Making
in there
that
to
clear.
clarify it so that there's no confusion.
Sure.
The second is in reading the styrofoam restrictions or the styrofoam things mentioned. Has anyone had a discussion with Harris Teeter specifically about their ability to substitute over the next 2 months or 3 months, which is the 9/1 date, the ability to get rid of styrofoam egg cartons and meat trays? And I ask that simply because of my experience in a grocery store, which is pretty limited. Both those things come in styrofoam. I've never seen them anything other than styrofoam, and I just want to make sure we're not putting some undue burden on a situation without having talked to the party.
No, I think that's a great idea. And a few municipalities have exempted those items. I think if we just looked at the city of Charleston, and the city of Charleston has an exemption for meat trays and egg cartons. So they are not prohibited under their ordinance. Charleston County did not have that in there. And so because we are effectively using what Charleston County had, that exemption is not in there for those items, but it's certainly something we can, have a conversation about. And if that's talking to Harris Teeter and then making a decision on whether or not we want to put that exemption into ours or not.
Yeah.
And if I can add, I reached out to a couple of municipalities, and I did receive 2 comments back, one from Folly Beach, and I just got back from Mount Pleasant, and I asked them about the egg carton. And in their ordinance, the way they got around that is they put any product purchased, prepared, or packaged outside the town of Mount Pleasant and sold in or delivered into the town are exempt from the ordinance. So
So that would be exempted in essence.
That's
'cause it's
correct.
It's packaged elsewhere.
that's correct. And that's how they address a lot of different, or items instead of trying to figure out, various items. They just put that language in their ordinance.
But that probably would
Do
not
meat
exempt the meat trays.
Right.
Because those are prepared in the grocery store.
Yeah, and they
right?
have that as a separate
They
on
have
theirs.
that
yeah.
separate. Okay.
My last comment then, or question is, we've got an implementation date here of September 1st, which is pretty quick, and I understand the rationale for it was to coordinate and synchronize with the county.
Right.
But I would like to make sure that there is an exemption or some type of an ability to allow entities on this island who will struggle with that date to have more time. I'm not quite sure how to go about that without a further discussion within council, but do you have any objections if we were to go through that
No,
process?
so, a lot, I can tell you the actual,
I know the way some towns
so
have
10
done.
out of 16 of the municipalities that have enacted this type of ordinance have provided for a 1-year waiver for businesses. So that's something, a hardship waiver, right? And so they would apply and say, basically, we've got too much inventory of this on hand. and we would like another year to use that up before we then comply.
And so the simple submission of a hardship waiver is sufficient to grant it? There's no onerous process for them to go through to prove anything?
I mean, I guess that would be up to council to decide what that process would be, if it would be, you know, a staff review or how that would be handled. But currently, the ordinance does not have that option for a one-year waiver.
But I know towns like Mount Pleasant and so on do have, I don't know whether it's a year or whatever, but have.
They're all a
Have
year.
have
Yeah.
a waiver period to work through inventory or whether there's some product where it's not clear what the replacement is.
That's correct.
But to be clear, they have to actually submit a request for that. It's not an automatic one-year waiver, but if someone
Correct.
has an issue, they can submit a request and it would be granted, is that?
That's
correct.
correct.
I would request for that to be added to the ordinance on
added.
second reading, would be my opinion.
Any other
I have
comments?
a question. Jim, in the Charleston ordinance, I can't find it right in front of me. Does that include those 4-ply plastic bags that Walmart is evidently using?
So how we have defined, so reusable plastic bags are not regulated under our ordinance or
Reasonable.
any of the ordinances. And so how you determine what a reusable plastic bag is, you've got to define what that is. And what we have done is basically use a combination of the county and a little bit of information from Mount Pleasant. And effectively, we've defined it as a bag that's at least 4 millimeters thick of plastic. And it's got to carry, I think, 12 pounds and be used 125 times and can be disinfected and reused. And so as long as a bag meets that requirement, then it would not be considered a single-use bag, and therefore it would not be regulated.
But it still is plastic,
It is,
yes.
yeah. So, I mean, this is only tackling, you know, what we define as a single-use plastic bag. So that's a very, you know, it's the single-use plastic bag that you think of, right? That you get at most grocery stores or gas
No,
stations.
I know it, yeah.
Sure, yeah.
In my sense, I know you all talked to a number of establishments, is that, you know, in the case, I mean, we don't have that many retail establishments. And the ones
Right.
we do, my sense is that at Freshfields, that already a number of the retailers have gone either to in most cases, to paper bags, with the exception of Harris Teeter and or the heavier plastic. And my understanding in the case of the resort is all, based on what I've seen, all of their plastic bags do meet the requirements for the reusable plastic bag. You know, in the comments that I've got, and you know, we don't get that many comments, so I don't want to give the impression I've had lots of them. Those that I've had have been, you know, overwhelmingly favorable in terms of the overall intent of the ordinance. But I think, and this is an old cliche, obviously, but the devil's always in the details, and that's where most of the questions that I'm getting, and maybe behind some of your comments too, is, okay, but is this covered, is this covered, is this covered? And one of the things that I'm finding, because we tried intentionally to make sure our language was as close to what other communities are doing, so that there isn't a lot of confusion, that in a lot of these other communities, when you ask them, well, they're still trying to, well, we know what we wrote, but we're not
Right.
really sure what we've covered. And while I think some people would be concerned that, they're gonna dilute this ordinance by lots of exceptions, I don't think that's the intent. But I think it is critical that we make sure that when it goes live, we are as clear as we possibly can about what it covers and what it doesn't, because otherwise it will be confusing, and I think we'll look silly if we can't clearly tell a retail establishment or a resident what it doesn't cover or does. So I think it would be useful for us between now and second reading, as has been suggested, to continue to have conversations with other entities that are simultaneously doing this, trying to better determine where we need to clarify some of the language, and that should be, I think,
That's exactly what I'm asking for, and then to make sure that we have an exception option for any of the facilities up at Harris Teeter, up at Fresh Fields or the resort or any other businesses.
Can I just ask about this hardship waiver? Is the idea, is it the way it's handled in other municipalities, that if a business establishment applies for a hardship waiver, it's granted, period, end of story? No questions asked or proof or anything? I mean, so if Harris Teeter say, I don't want to mean to dig at Harris Teeter, but if they say, you know, we have lots and lots of paper bags, but we also have some of these plastic bags sitting around that we always tell you to use. So we really want a 1-year waiver, and it's then granted, because then all we're doing is pushing the whole thing out a year into the future.
Here's my reaction to that would be, the question I would ask back is, well, what's your supply? And if it's a 3-month supply, you know, if it's a 2-month supply. I mean, I think if Cantina, whatever, says, hey, I just ordered 6 months worth of straws, we might say, fine, you know, once you've used them all up.
There is a part of an honor system here, though, I
But
think.
yeah, I mean,
But that's
I mean,
my question. Do we look at why they're asking, and is there a possibility that we say, no, that's not really a sensible application, or is it okay, you've applied, it's granted?
Well, Klaus, of course, we'll look at it, but as I was just looking at, as an example, at Mount Pleasant, they actually have a committee that this goes through their Public Service Committee. And they do require that they provide it in writing. They consider it, they can approve it, they can deny it, but they do have to justify, they being the food service industry or whomever is asking for that exemption. They do have to justify why before this committee, and then that committee can then make a decision. Depending on the decision, if they deny it, the applicant can appeal that decision to town council, and town council has a final decision.
That makes more sense to me, yeah.
so we'll ask staff to surface some language between now and the second reading that addresses those couple issues.
Yeah, that'd be good.
All right?
Good.
So with those comments, I remember we had a motion and a second, so at this point, we can go ahead and vote to approve as is. These aren't changes we're making now, and then at second reading, those can be
Yep.
added. All right? Any other comments or suggestions?
No.
All right, so we have a motion and a second, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay. All right, Arts Council quarterly
Yep.
summary.
The Arts Council, the Kiowa Arts and Cultural Events Council, had a very, very busy first quarter of 2019. 17 performances, of which 13 were free. 10 of those were sold out. We're really getting a wonderful following. So more than 4,000 tickets were distributed. 6 different venues were used. We ended up, not that we shoot for this, but 2 Grammy Award winners were involved in all this, which is great. One happened to win it just the week before she appeared. But let me use the Steep Canyon Rangers as an example of a concert. This was held at Seabrook, which has been a very helpful new venue for us this year. And because venues are going to be more at risk and harder to come by, that's very helpful to us to have that. It's a good place. It's out at their far end of the island at their country club. But we held that event there, and interestingly, as your highlights notice, 63% of the population was still Kiowa people, 19% Seabrook, and it was on their island, and then another 18% were off-island other visitors, which is good. This is what we want to see. So I think the Arts Council continues to do a great job. Just to put on 17 performances in the quarter is something else. And I think the town appreciates it. I mean, the residents love it, guests love it. So it seems to be going very well.
Great. Any other, we'll move to town administrator report.
Yeah, I just have a few things I would like to update on with regards to Beach Walker Drive project. I've been sending you all emails, but I want to let you know if you have not driven by there, they are, for the most part, almost done with that project. So they're way ahead of schedule. They have a few things still that's left. They're hoping to finish that by the end of this week, if not beginning of next week. If you go out there, I believe, Rusty, they just probably have some grading along the side and maybe some other things that they have to do. But for the most part, they're done with our
Great.
portion of the project.
Striping done today?
I think they did striping.
No.
They haven't did striping yet?
This morning.
Okay, so that's probably part of the thing that they'll have to finish by the end of this week or beginning of next week.
Asphalt's down now that they're at the point of regrading the shoulders
Our shoulders, yeah.
and doing finishing up that.
And it is
That part.
still a road to nowhere. The park is nowhere close to completion, so.
Right.
They paid,
They actually did pave,
right.
Well, no, they only paved halfway in.
so that's all they're.
That's all the paving, the rest of it
Just
stays.
paving with the end.
Is gonna look like that?
Yes, is, the other sections they're not touching.
Okay.
And I received word from the park that they plan on having, they may not be completely finished by Memorial Weekend, but they will have the park open for Memorial Weekend for, visitors to be able to utilize the
In the
park.
Cove, people will be thrilled.
So I wanted to,
Can I ask one question?
Yeah,
The
sure.
bike path ends, and what will be at the end of that bike path?
but right now, that's where our right-of-way end, so we have to work with the partners, and we're working with Ray Pantlet to see if, basically with the design of the park, if their apron or their entrance, if it should ideally be able to
Tie in.
could tie in with ours, so we're talking with them, but our bike path goes up to our right-of-way.
I got you.
So the rest is all private property.
Okay.
So we're trying to work that out right now. The only other thing, two other things I wanted to update you all on, as you all remember with regards to our offshore drilling, the town as well as other communities along the coast of South Carolina, we were participated in a suit with South Carolina Environmental Law Project in regards to the offshore drilling matter related to the current administration. Currently, right now, I don't know if you guys have read or kept up with that. I know Dwayne sent a link to us letting us know that right now that has been placed on hold. So right now, there's nothing going on. As you all know, the lawsuit that we joined with other South Carolina municipalities along the coast didn't cost us anything right now. We just basically put our name on that list with other communities. But right now, the permit process through the current administration is placed on hold, so there's nothing going on with Scalp and the town right now. So I just wanted to update you all on that. I know it was just something that we did, and it's just kind of been in the background. I also want to wrap up my report by introducing two of our newest employees to the Town of Kiowa family. If you both can stand up, Brian and Todd, and I'll let Bruce, you can stand up and introduce Todd if you want to give any information, and then Rusty, I'll let you do that for Brian.
This is Todd Kaminsky. He's taking over the position of Juan Martin. As you know, has left us a while back.
Nobody will ever actually take over for long.
You don't want to do that.
Okay.
And he didn't really, hasn't left us.
Yeah.
And he
Yes, indeed.
hasn't left us. He's still alive.
Todd comes to us from Hilton Head Island. He has done code enforcement in the past at Hilton Head. He is also a past deputy, so he's well versed in how to deal with the public and how to sometimes get information from them that they don't know they're getting. Not underhanded in any way. He works well with us. We're looking forward to keeping him on board. We're going through some training right now, and we'll get him up to speed for too much longer.
Welcome, thanks.
Welcome.
Very much. Thank you.
Brian, this is Brian Gutshaw. Brian is taking over my position in the Public Works and the building facility.
Tell him why he's taking over your position, because you are retiring.
I am retiring at the end of June. I've had 23 wonderful years here with the town, and it's time to move on. So Brian will be taking my spot. Brian comes to us by way of the Citadel. He also has ties to the island. He has family out here. And matter of fact, Brian used to work for me doing code enforcement when we had the summer guys on. Brian's started through the ranks with Butch Neal, beach service. He did umbrellas and chairs. He's done code enforcement. So now he's moving up big time for us.
Right.
I think we're gonna see good things for Brian. He's gonna fit. Gutschall. That's correct. Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. So
All right.
he's been,
right, again, welcome, thanks.
Thank you so much. Look forward to
Great.
Welcome.
Anything else?
That's it.
All right, I'll move to council member, either any general comments or committee updates. I'll start at my left. Marion?
Thank you, Mayor. Memorial Day weekend, we will have an additional shift of off-duty deputies working from 8 to 4 to handle the additional crowds. I've been in contact with CERT, and there's a new leader of CERT in Kiowa, and that is Scott Nelson. Scott will be trying to renew the organization and get an inventory of the skills so they can be used in other areas as we move forward. We also had our emergency management plan exercise, which was excellent. It focused on how we would react if there was an earthquake. And I think it was very, very helpful because all of our resources were addressed and how they would be used, and it gave us a lot of food for thought. And they'll have another planning session in 2 weeks, and that'll be on the hurricane, and that's it.
I just want to add also, Scott, thank you for stepping up to this, but I also want to thank, Fran Wormuth has been leading the CERT team for about 3 years, since she took over from Jack Reagan, about 3 years,
Yeah.
and I've thanked Fran, but I want to publicly thank her for her several years of taking over the leadership of the CERT team.
She certainly
so.
deserves that. Thank you.
Anything else? All right, Dan?
No.
No additional comments, sir.
Chris?
Nothing else.
Nothing.
All right, with that, I will move to citizens' comments.
Wendy Kulik, 38 Marsh Edge Lane. I would ask all of council to grab onto the dais, because all of my comments today, which are going to be very brief, are compliments, and I know that's a shock.
Thank you, Mayor. Say no more. So you're good.
I couldn't agree more with Kelly's comments and the action that council is taking about single-use plastics. Future generations will thank you very, very much for that. I know it's a first step, but it's an important first step. I'd also like to thank the town for continuing its fiscal conservativeness when it comes to spending funds. One of these days, our luck's going to run out with hurricanes. And as important as the expenditures are, and I was at a HALOS event this morning listening to 2 of the beneficiaries of the HALOS's funds. You talk about grabbing at heartstrings. You know, everything the town does to support the kids on Johns and Wadmalaw Islands is incredibly appreciated, and I see firsthand the benefits to that. I want to thank the town for not funding the partner's request for Party in the Park, because I don't think that's an appropriate thing for the town to be doing. That's a private, commercial organization, and I appreciate the fact that you're not supporting that. And I don't know how much the town had to do with not just the county mounties on the island who are monitoring speeding, but given all the times I have almost gotten hit coming back onto the island when the speed limit goes down to 35, I really appreciate them being out there, because I've seen a definite improvement in the raceway effect of that straight part. So thank you for all of that.
And those, for the most part, are full-time
Deputies.
daily deputies who are,
Well, thank
which
you.
our residents may or may not like the fact they're being pulled over more often, but they have picked up, I think,
Thank you.
the speed patrols.
Oh,
Right.
one more thing. I have to say thank you to Dorota. I haven't had a chance, because we've been out of town and I was at other events today, but I haven't had a chance to look through the budget. But Dorota has done the last few budgets what I asked for years, and was told by our former treasurer that it could not be done. And so I really appreciate her efforts on that.
Thank you. Any other citizens' comments? All right, With that, we have no executive session planned, so I will ask for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second?
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
All right, we are adjourned. Thank you, everybody.
Nice to see you also. Thanks for sending us that information.